And get started. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us for our The Power of AWS Improving Education Technology webinar. I am Jessie. I am a part of our marketing department, and I am just going to cover a couple of logistics before Dustin Milberg, our field CTO, and our presenter today will kick off. First and foremost, we do want this to be interactive, so please feel free to utilize the Q&A feature in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. We will answer all questions at the end. We'll have a Q&A time specifically set out. And then lastly, we will also be recording this session. We will get you a copy of that by tomorrow, hopefully morning. So please be on the lookout for that. And that's all from me. So with that, Dustin, I will pass it to you.
Well, thank you, Jesse. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Dustin Milberg. I'm the field CTO here at InterVision, and I have what is perhaps one of the coolest jobs on the planet. My mail is delivered to Portland, Oregon, but I'm wherever my customers need me to be. And I focus most of my time with technology leaders helping build out a strategic roadmap for technology adoption. I'm here today to talk about a couple of things that I am really passionate about. First and foremost is education. Obviously, this is an education-focused webinar, and technology solves many more problems than that. But I had the distinct pleasure to serve as the technology leader for a large urban school district in Portland, Oregon, for about 6 years. And being a leader in a large urban district has many advantages because there's a high student population, there's more funding, enabling organizations to procure more things to help improve achievement. But one of the things that schools or districts that are outside of those urban boundaries often suffer from is the ability to have enough students to get the resources they need from a financial perspective. So we're going to take a look today at a case study about how an education service district, and we have these in Oregon, I know they're all over Washington and many of the states throughout the country, help provide services so that whether a child is going to a heavily populated rural or even suburban high school, all the way to one-room schoolhouses and farm towns across the country, are able to get the same resources so that they are not at a disadvantage from a technology perspective. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. Like Jesse said, please keep the questions coming because this is meant to be interactive. If you are wondering what that QR code is on your screen, that's a link to my LinkedIn page. Feel free to capture that. We'll have it at the end. If you miss it, we can absolutely get it for you in the recording as well. So a little bit about InterVision, for those of you who are not familiar, we are the premier strategic solution provider in the industry, and we're looking to provide that really comprehensive end-to-end portfolio that addresses all of your IT and engineering needs. Now, I get a lot of questions about why IT and engineering, and I look at those kind of with this lens. IT is the stuff that you do regardless of the business that you're in, and engineering is that kind of unique technology that you have because of the business that you're in. So obviously, those of us who are providing services to K through 12, we think about things like student information systems and content management systems and curriculum management systems. So as well as all the other assessment platforms and things like that go through that are important to K through 12. So, but InterVision really is focused on that entire portfolio. And I'll talk a little bit about how we bring those services to bear as part of this case study we're going to talk about today. I should also mention that in addition to this being our charter, we are an AWS Premier Partner. Now, those of you who are not familiar with AWS Premier level partnership, it is not something to be thrown around lightly. Obtaining this Premier status is difficult to begin with, and maintaining it is even more comprehensively difficult because we have to continue to get more competencies, continue to deliver high excellence, continue to have referenceable customers like yourselves. And so you can see here kind of where we are positioned. We obtained our premier level competency and premier partnership status as part of the public sector. So much of the work we did early on is in education and K through 12, which gives us, I think, a significant advantage. Plus, we've got a lot of technology thought leaders in the organization who came out of the education space and are intimately aware of the challenges that you all face. So today we are going to look at a case study, and this is about an education service district. Again, a regional service provider that provides comprehensive services so that if you're, like I said, in a very small school to a very large school, you have the same level of technology services across the board. This particular K through 12 ESD provided services to over 100 sites, so 100 different either schools or kind of itinerant locations that provided uh, localized services. Maybe that's speech therapy, maybe that's differentiated education. Over 80,000 students served, and in this particular ESD, 67% of them were on free and reduced meals. Now, those who don't come out of the K-12 space may wonder why that's important, and I'll just for the benefit of everybody here, the higher the level of free and reduced lunch, the more Title I funds are available to the district. And so it's all about optimizing those funds to make sure that as much of those resources go back into the education technology and out of the core infrastructure or operations, because every dollar we spend on operations and education takes away from the larger amount of technology we're able to put in the hands of kids. Also, keep in mind, if we have that high of a free and reduced lunch population, that obviously means that the resources that are available to kids in that population are obviously diminished. So they may not have access to high-end computing at home, which makes remote learning, especially in a time like COVID, even more difficult. So let's dive in a little bit here. So the profile of this particular ESD, they had over 10 major hosted applications and 4 different environments for each of those. So a dev, a QA, a pilot, and production. And the infrastructure was all aging out. Matter of fact, many of them were well out of support contract. We had some that 7, 8-year-old infrastructure aging out. Over 90 databases. One of the big challenges they had is some of those databases, there was not enough awareness due to either turnover or lack of focus of what those databases did. So they didn't want to just turn them off and wait and see who screamed and said, hey, what happened to my data? So instead, they wanted a really thoughtful approach to making sure that there was a planned migration for all this. They did have a very small AWS footprint at the start, but it was kind of a little bit of a scatter plot all over the place, different people managing it, several different accounts, and they needed to bring control over that. Over 150,000 concurrent users. So that included students, teachers, staff, parents, and connected systems. So at peak, at any given point in time, of those 10 major applications, they could have over 150,000 concurrent connections into those environments. So the on-premise environment was also designed for peak concurrency. That means no scaling. So to kind of give you an analog on that, that's like building a 20-lane highway that you're going to run at 2 lanes 95% of the time. That's obviously a huge financial sink, which again means more money going into the infrastructure and operations and less money going into the hands of kids that can actually help improve teaching and learning. And over 100 end user applications. So if you think about this for a moment, in a traditional IT world in a business, we may have the ability to do a mobile or even fixed device management, right? Where we can push out updates. We've got group policy. We've got all these things that can control these. But with over 100 end user applications on machines that may or may not have been sanctioned by the ESD, the ability to control and manage all those and keep all those applications up to date is not only a costly thing, it's a timely thing, which means more resources, more people, itinerant staff walking around into these buildings, providing those kinds of services. And so again, we wanted to bring the money back to the education conversation as much as we possibly could. Also, like all education environments, zero tolerance for outages. Any interruption in pedagogy is time lost. And we all know, given the last several years of what happened with COVID, how much time, instructional time was actually lost. So we cannot impact that. And our kids deserve it, our teachers deserve it. And so as part of this zero tolerance for outages, however, there was no DR, no high availability, and no business continuity solution in place. And obviously that's a risk, right? You can drive without a seatbelt and hope you don't get into an accident, but that's just not a good policy. So this was kind of the profile. And really when we engaged with this client, instead of kind of coming in and saying, all right, here's what we're going to do, it was more about business-based outcomes and what the drivers were and what they wanted to see in return. So a big business driver for them obviously is to be fiscally minded, back to that, where we place the money, whether it goes in the hands of kids and teachers, or does it go back to core infrastructure. So reduce the expenses, obviously, reduce the technical debt. So you can imagine, like many education environments and even business environments, tons of financial debt accrued over many years. So getting that paid down, I mean, they were paying for licenses that they weren't even using, which I'm sure is a very common theme for many of you on the call. And then obviously, to be fiscally minded, we have to think about how do we scale up and down to meet the demand of our users wherever they are on this journey and wherever the customers needs help and support. So this is the profile of the client and their objectives, fiscally minded. Second one was be competitive. Now, this is a hot button, I think, for a lot of technology leaders in districts. They think, well, gosh, what am I competing against? And I think if COVID has taught us anything, traditional public sector education absolutely has competition out there. Kids have a choice where they go get their education, and parents have a choice. And quite honestly, kids are competing you're not only competing with other educational entities, you're also competing with the kids are competing with one another to make themselves more competitive and more attractive to secondary education beyond high school. So as part of that, districts have to think about how, and service districts have to think about, how do you become more innovative? How do we change the way that we can increase the reach by improving our breadth of innovation and also the depth of innovation? How do we do more with what we've already got? Security is obviously paramount in any education environment. We're talking about kids, and nothing is more sacred than protecting kids. And then obviously improving learning in and out of the classroom, like we all learned with COVID. School is not a physical place where kids go to get knowledge. And pedagogy has fundamentally changed from sage on the stage to guide from the side. And we know that. And so it's about helping meet kids where they are and giving them the tools and the resources to be able to be competitive outside of the classroom. And then leveraging data to improve pedagogy. This has been critical. Many of you, I would ask for a show of hands, how many of you actually have a data, whether it be some sort of analytics or AI or ML strategy to improve pedagogy? And I bet it would be all over the map, because this is a fundamental thing. The way that organizations harness the power of data today is a key differentiator. And so it can absolutely measurably improve student performance if we're looking at the right data, and then we use the right kinds of next steps or supports or differentiated instruction to help those kids based on those data. And then third business drivers, be compliant. I don't have to tell any of you that compliance is critical, not only from a security standpoint, but also from those of you who are going out for E-rate funds, or those of you who are going out for school bonds or technology bonds. They're asking you to show that you can improve your security and be resilient. And you're having to build tech plans in order to do that. And this is a critical component of that, is compliancy, in addition to just keeping our kids safe, which is table stakes in and out of the classroom. So our approach was, rather than come in with a whole bunch of canned solutions based on what we thought we heard, we went in and said, hey, let's leverage the AWS program. And by the way, AWS has many programs that can help offset the cost of many of these activities, either partially or entirely. And so that's one of the big advantages of partnering with InterVision and as an AWS Premier Partner. So we said, we're going to come in and we're going to do an environment review. And we were able to partner with AWS and get them to fund this activity entirely. And as part of that, we were able to come and look at what the environment really was. Remember those 90 databases I talked about earlier that they didn't know what all of them did? Really figure out which of those were critical, which of those needed to remain on premise, which of those could be safely migrated to the cloud and optimized for scalability, and which of those could be retired. And then based on that, we were able to put together a plan. And this was those big bullets in blue there. So the migration plan was get to AWS from on-premise. And there were really three things that we had to consider there. Some of those applications were just perfectly fine being lifted and shifted because they were so small. We knew the scale, it was captured, it wasn't going to be a big cost sink. and it had the right security profile to be successful in the cloud. The second was planning for refactoring. So we can refactor in a number of different ways. An easy way is taking old legacy databases or even modern databases where there's high license cost and migrating those over to native AWS services. So we were able to leverage some of those native AWS database services in order to drive down costs and improve performance at the same time. And then, like most districts, not a lot of software development going on inside the ESD itself. There was some, but not a lot. So they're buying those commercial off-the-shelf applications, right? These are your Blackboards or your Power Schools, or pick your student information system or your curriculum management system. And so not a lot of, software development that you can do there, but there's a lot you can do on kind of the customization and how you optimize the way that those applications consume the cloud. And so we were able to put together a good migration strategy, again, getting AWS to offset a significant amount of the costs. Optimizing the current environment that they had already in AWS. Remember, they had a small footprint in AWS to begin with. So it was really about how do we get the most out of that? Do they have cost controls in place? Did they have a plan to shut down and orphaned instances? And did they really take a thoughtful approach at how they manage the environment? Controlling costs along the journey, like I said, putting those guards and the financial alarms in place. We looked at things like AWS savings plans to help them optimize the costs along the way and make sure that it was not only performant today, but could scale for the future. And using data to project what their usage would be based on those patterns. Reducing risk and technical debt, that was an obvious one. Again, you go back to what are those things that we have to migrate? What are those things that we keep on premise? And which were the things that we could retire as part of that? And we retired a significant portion. In a moment, I'll show you some of those outcomes. Implementing DR, obviously key to be compliant. And then adopting those native AWS solutions. I talked a little bit about database solutions that are native, but there's lots of other native solutions that they could adopt that would help improve the way that they consume, drive down costs, improve security, and improve the overall performance of the systems. And then with all of this, and we'll talk about how we enable lower cost end user computing, in an environment with 67% free and reduced lunch, obviously getting technology in the hands of every kid is paramount, especially when technology is out of reach for many of the parents to provide those resources to their kids. So we'll take a look at how we were able to drive down costs of end user computing and make those dollars that they had go further. So the actions were, we get the migration done. All the applications got moved over, those 10 plus applications moved over to AWS. In addition, we also were able to take 15 or so of their Joomla websites and move those over to a native AWS service, Lightsail, to drive down the cost significantly. We'll look at the actual measures here in a moment. Those 90 plus databases, we migrated those, the ones we didn't retire, over to Aurora and serverless types of environments. So we got rid of compute costs, we got rid of server OS costs, we got rid of operational management and infrastructure management, really to help drive down the costs and provide a highly resilient, highly functional, and highly backed up system. New implementations. We talked about the security profile. So again, never is security more important than it is in education. So implementing AWS Security Hub and Guard Duty immediately helped improve their performance from a security posture standpoint and put them more in compliance. And then we were also able to help them optimize costs by leveraging AWS AppStream and Workspaces. For those of you who are unfamiliar with it, think about Workspaces as kind of like a virtual desktop environment. Again, this is one of those, if I was presenting in a room full of you, I'd ask for a show of hands, how many of you use thin clients or Chromebooks? And the hands would go up. And how many of you need that experience where the kids or the teachers need to actually have a fully functional operating system environment for them to leverage? And that's what Workspaces provides in the AWS environment. But it's when you need it on demand. You only pay for it when you're using it. When you're not, it goes away and the costs go away. However, we found that especially for the kids, many of them didn't require access to a fully functional operating system. They just needed access to those applications when the instruction or the time at home after the school day went away. So we were able to leverage AWS AppStream to virtualize the applications and present them based on who needed access to them. And what's great about this is it ties into their group policy, it ties into their AD infrastructure. So based on who they are and how they log in, we can automatically and programmatically give kids access to the things they need and eliminate the cruff and access to things they don't need. So that helped them optimize costs, which helped them drive down their operations costs, which meant they were able to procure more Chromebooks and get them in the hands of kids that weren't able to provide those resources themselves. So let's look at where the rubber meets the road, because this is really what it's all about. Any of you who are going forward and asking for money as good stewards of taxpayer money, we know we have to do this. It's all about the outcomes and how can we prove it? Well, the good news is we've got a case study here for you to leverage. So if we go back to what the customer wanted and what they expected, what did they actually get? All right, so we talked about being fiscally minded, reducing expenses, reducing technical debt, and enabling them to scale. Here's what they actually saw. 80% cost reduction of their 2014-2015 spend 3 years out. 80% cost reduction. So if any of you could think about what your operations costs are today and you could reduce that by 80%, what would you do with that money? I guarantee you more of us would look at ways of getting that technology in the hands of kids to improve instruction and learning. Like I said, we were able to get lower cost end user computing resources as a result of driving down the cost of managing it, and then scaling to accommodate the concurrent users at the lowest cost, right? So we were able to make sure that they had 150,000 connections at any given point in time, but we used some analytics and some data to project that curve and that arc of when kids connect, or when teachers connect, or when parents connect, or when other applications connect, so that we could provision the resources as they were necessary, and then turn them off when they weren't, so they didn't have to pay for it. Being competitive, improving innovation, improving security, improving learning in and out of the classroom, and then leveraging data to improve pedagogy. So we scaled the infrastructure to measurably improve the performance, like I talked about in the earlier slide. A huge part of innovation was modernizing their approach. So I was at the AWS Summit back in, I guess it was in July, and it was in Anaheim, California. And at that point, AWS announced that since January 1st, they had already released in 2022 over 3,000 new products. Now, for those of you that are running a technology shop in a district or in an ESD or in a school, you're probably thinking, how am I supposed to keep up with that many innovations inside of AWS? The answer is you're not, and that's why you partner with us. And that's why AWS wants you to partner with us, because we stay abreast of what the most up-to-date, the newest technologies that can meet your business drivers and expected outcomes, to align those things into your environment. So we were able to modernize their environment through the new AWS offerings and eliminate a lot of infrastructure and management as part of the approach, right? So this is key in what we were actually able to see. And then, like I said, provide more compute to students and extending learning beyond the classroom. And then on compliance, right? We not only help them get their workloads to the cloud, but we also are providing them with ongoing 24/7 managed security support for over 30 AWS engagements. That means that they're able to take those resources who would normally be looking at this and shift them into those that are much more strategic and aligned with educational outcomes, as opposed to watching dials and worrying about when the pager goes off what they have to do. Instead, we take care of all of that for them, making them more compliant. So what are the next steps? We got those things done. Well, there's still migration, a lot of in-house machine learning. They want to get over to AWS SageMaker. This is going to help them fundamentally not only improve the application usage, but what are kids doing? What are kids interested in? This is one of those times where I would say, show of hands, how many of you have a Wi-Fi network in your schools or in your districts that kids connect to? Wouldn't it be great to understand what those kids are doing, not only in the classroom, but when they're not in the classroom? And there are a lot of, especially in higher ed, that are making the shift to gamification. We're starting to see it more inside of K through 12, but understanding how kids behave and what's important to them and how they can interact with one another means we can develop new ways of learning to extend that. Now, having to go figure all that out is really difficult unless you can afford to hire a bunch of technology-focused data scientists. Instead, we can use things like AWS SageMaker to automate that approach. We also, InterVision, have a deep AI ML practice we have been working with for quite some time, but recently acquired back in February, Virtuosity Consulting Group, over 150 engineers, deep experience in AI and ML, as well as Web 3.0 technologies like gamification, like understanding the metaverse, like looking at things like blockchain to provide a secure but yet innovative experience for your kids. And then improve resiliency. Like I mentioned to you, they're leveraging InterVision to help with that DRHA business continuity solution. But how many of you are scared to death about ransomware attacking your district's data? Because data is at the key of it's kind of the crown jewel of most organizations in education. So they've implemented, they're going to be implementing our ransomware protection as a service. This means that not only are they dramatically reducing their risk of ever getting hit with ransomware, they're also providing ongoing education, or will be providing ongoing education to their staff, to their students, to any other people that work in the district on how to avoid it. And should they get hit, which is likely for just about any organization in this day and age, they are able to recover and make sure that the data that they have is secure. And that can't be understated. And all it takes is not a nefarious act, but just a genuine, honest mistake for your organization to get compromised. So these are key next steps for this ESD. And then expansion. How do we look at, I talked about those over 3,000 new products that have been developed in less than a year at AWS. How do you stay abreast of those? And so we perform regular quarterly updates on things that we think are going to be most meaningful to move that educational needle for all the kids and the teachers, and how they can harness the power of AWS to really get them. So here's some key findings and leverage points that kind of come out of this for me, as well as for our customers that think about these kinds of things. Number one, AWS and InterVision is a premier partnership. That is what's going to enable organizations to continue momentum while migrating with fidelity. So keep in mind that this act of migration, I've long used this analogy. Migrating to the cloud is something you should only hope to do once. So think about if you've ever had to have knee surgery or any kind of surgery for that matter, you don't go study up and then learn how to do surgery yourself on something you hope you are only going to have happen once, right? Because doing that means you're going to take time away from your regular job, and then you're going to have to figure out how to do that on your own. And meanwhile, the business that you were in supposed to take care of while you were doing all this doesn't get tended to. So by leveraging partnerships like we have with AWS and InterVision together, enables you to have confidence that you're going to get to the cloud with fidelity in a shorter amount of time with reduced costs. AWS has some key data around this, but on average, organizations that leverage partners to help with that migration get to the cloud 38% faster and can do it at 43% of the cost. So something to think about. New AWS offerings, like that, keeping you abreast of them. It costs you nothing to learn on these things, and that's our job, is to stay abreast of them so that your staff can focus on what matters most, and that's teaching and learning. And then, as a key partner, right, we're going to make that entire roadmap predictable for you. One of the biggest things when you have fixed budgets, like most public sector organizations do, matter of fact, many of us are working in arrears on budgets that were built before the current tax year. So we have to maintain within those guardrails is, gosh, the cloud is scary. I've heard horror stories of organizations running over on costs. How do I make sure I don't do that? Or at least I know if I buy all this on-premise infrastructure, I know what my fixed costs are. While that can be true, without a good partner and a good focus and strategy on that, we take that guesswork out of it for you so that you do have a predictable budget, so that you can spend with confidence, so that you know exactly where your dollars are going from an AWS spend, enabling you to go put more of that money back in the hands of teachers and kids. And then This is key. Now, there's a lot of different circumstantial evidence here, but in this ESD, we have seen the graduation rate increase and the achievement gap decrease. Like I said, there's a lot of things that go into this, but especially since 2016 and all the way through COVID, just by making sure that we have technology in the hands of kids that wouldn't have had it before is a key difference maker, especially when kids were having to learn at home. So by getting ahead of that, this particular ESD was able to kind of keep on going. Yes, they had to change some behaviors. Yes, they went through some of the similar challenges that other organizations did, but this was a key difference maker for this particular ESD. And they have data to show that since they have made this shift, the graduation rate has increased and the achievement gap has decreased. And that's key for every single school district leader, education service district leader, technology leader within that organization. So that's what I had to present to you today. Hopefully you got a good sense of what this particular ESD went through, what was important to them, how we could tie the work directly back to the outcomes that they had set forth in their initial approach. And then also I want to remind you that a significant portion of the work that we did, we were able to partner with AWS and offset the cost for that, so that heavy lift becomes much lighter of making that migration to the cloud. And by partnering with us, this particular ESD was able to also keep their key resources focused on what mattered most. And so I hope you're able to get a good sense of that. For now, I'm going to pause. That, by the way, that again is my LinkedIn profile. I'll pause here and see what kind of questions we have.
Thank you, Dustin. We haven't had questions come in yet. We did have one of our BDRs reach out just saying if anyone needs help, please see Toby's information in the Q&A box. But if there
Yep.
are any other questions, please feel free to submit them. Otherwise,
Yeah,
I
and
can see.
I will offer back out with, as Toby's doing this. Again, I will move heaven and earth for anything related to education and kids. So I am happy to meet with any of you in person, remotely, whatever makes the most sense for your organization. Nothing is more important to me than improving our kids' future, and I know that's many of us do this work because of that. And so, as you work with Toby, or feel free to contact me directly, and we can continue this conversation at any point in time.
Thanks, Dustin. Again, not seeing any questions yet. I think you pretty much covered everything clearly, perfectly.
Well,
Um, so again, everyone, this session is being recorded, so we will definitely get that to you. And if you think of any questions later, please feel free to reach out to Dustin or your sales rep, anyone, and we will get that answer for you. But if there are no questions, thank you again for joining us, and we will give you a bit of time back in your day.
thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Dustin.
Bye bye.